welcome to Hands that Steal from Other Mouths.
So, here it is. My attempt to recruit more anti-imperialists using a little story about the West versus the rest. Let's start here with us. In the land of the free, where our bloody hands collectively reap the very best capitalism has to offer. This is fine. Look over there! It's the others, the mouths. They're the rats to our dead traps. But more on that later. Players? Alright, tonight, joining us on center stage to provide the visuals for our story, we have two main metaphors. The first, representing the global north, where fascism is in, being anti-war is out, and child labor is oh so cheap. Give it up for the hand! Now, listen, if we're talking cheap labor, like as close to slavery as we can get, our next metaphor representing the global south knows a little something about that. Put your colonizing hands together for the mouths. Here's how it's gonna work. It's the hand versus the mouth in a good old-fashioned fight to the death over natural resources. As the hand, you're the extractor, plundering this beautiful land and stealing for profit. As the mouth, you're the guardian, protecting the community and the land from the greedy capitalist hands. Get it? Got it? Good. Now, y'all took it out over some cobalt while I get back to the story. Winner gets to decide the new world order! Our story on the vicious system that is modern-day Western imperialism in Hamland, where the corporate usually white pants run the show. No, not because we want them to, or even because they're good at it. Far from that. It's because they designed it that way. You see, the corporate hands and the armed hand of the state work closely together to steal their wealth and thus their power through exploitation and extraction. In the past, these two parties have done a pretty similar collaboration in enslaving and dispossessing entire populations all over the globe. We called it colonialism. But that's over, right? Like, the former colonies are free. They're their own countries now, and if they're so poor, it's because they're not developed enough. If anything, we should send more state hands to their land for human aid and corporate hands to provide jobs, because that's what they need and want, right? Jobs and financial literacy planning and doctors without borders and missionaries and non-profits and jobs and... How about a little sovereignty? De jure colonialism might be over, but de facto colonialism, Western imperialism, it's alive. And it's holding on for dear life. So, look at that brat in a dead trap. That's actually how this mess is structured. The hands are the dominant dollars, so the rules for what is valuable and what is not. Products, like your little smartphone, your air fryers and vibrators, valuable. The raw materials that were crucial in making those items, fractions of a penny, which is perfect for the hand because we also saddle the mouths with a ton of debt and super high interest rates, courtesy of the IMF and the World Bank. Sickening, no. And that's been the unequal setup for a while now. Arranged by the Western and white hands so that the mouths stay poor and dependent on their money and technology forever. What happens when mouths want better? When they decide they've had enough of this rigged game, they mobilize and they fight for their sovereignty. While the ham, desperate to cling on to their power, call them terrorists and declare fucking war.
Okay, welcome y'all. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is actually so great to see so many faces in this room this afternoon. My name is Temi, and I am the creator behind this very ambitious project called Hands That Steal From Other Mouths. It initially started as an arcade cabinet that I was trying to use to explore themes about an undeveloped Africa. And at the time of the project, when I was making it for Meow Wolf, I was commissioned to make it. I was like grappling with this sort of central organizing question for the project, which was, why is Africa so poor when it's a continent that's so resource rich? That's a question that's deeply personal to me as an African from Nigeria, but just also as a person who wants to live and build a world where people are put over profit. And so I'm grappling with this question, why is Africa so poor when it's a continent that's so resource rich? Why selling all of these raw commodities that the entire world needs hasn't led to any kind of economic prosperity for the entire continent? And this project that I did for Meow Wolf was sort of my way of both learning about it myself, but also trying to explain to other people the answers behind that question. And I loved the project. I had a great time working on it. It was a great opportunity. At the same time, I knew the limits of the work because I knew if I wanted to do more than just educate people about the issue, that I'd have to move beyond the arcade cabinet. And so I started to form some more goals for the project that we're going to kind of talk through today. But beyond education, we're using this work to both mobilize and organize local community. And to do that, I had to transition the project from an arcade cabinet experience into this sort of live performance, also community teach-in, and political organizing tool. So I've expanded it to those things. Since then, I've been performing this work alongside Jordan and other collaborators in different cities all over the country. And now our games are changed. This is the first time we're doing it in front of a game-specific audience, so I'm super excited about that. But yeah, 3 main missions for the work: educate, mobilize, organize. Why do we do that, and how do we do that? The reason why is probably something that resonates with a lot of people in this room, right? It's becoming unavoidable to really reckon with the ways in which we are increasingly confronted with the forces of end-stage capitalism. And so Jordan and I believe firmly that we're in a place right now where we need to start working to be better positioned to build and fight for the world that we want to live in next as the working class, so that we're not dictated to by these power structures, these corporate elites, on what that world should be. We should be able to build and make it ourselves with each other. And so we're using this project to do that. And how we're doing that is 3 ways. We're educating with live video game performance and community teach-ins. We're mobilizing with digital and physical group play with community members, as well as people who are doing the work, organizations that are doing the work. We'll get more into what that means a little bit later. And then we're organizing as well. So organizing as local community, organizing with people in movement work to come together, create bonds, and then start to build. For the length of today's performance, it's only 30 minutes. Usually for festivals, we only focus on the educate part. Jordan will explain more about the organize and mobilize portions of the project a little bit later. So back to the original question, right? The thing that was the catalyst for this project. Why is Africa so poor when it's a continent that is so resource rich? At the time when I was exploring the answer to this project, I very quickly realized the neocolonial tools of oppression and coercion that are used against Africa and the global south don't actually just stop at Africa's borders, right? It's a lot of the same playbook from the West that has been perfected for decades, if not centuries, with many different empires. And so if I was really gonna understand these power structures, this coercion, this oppression, I had to zoom out past Africa and really understand it as a global system that affects people on that continent, but also domestically here. Again, the same playbook. And so when I'm analyzing all of these figures in this global geopolitical game, I start to abstract them into characters so that I can explain to folks who come to see the work in ways that use metaphor so that people can really get grounded in the story and the narrative of the project. So there are 2 main factions in the work. There are the hands, represented as the global north, and then the global south, which is represented as the mouths. And these are the 2 factions, main characters, that I use to explain real-world geopolitical events. Okay, so we're talking about oppression, we're talking about power, we're talking about systems. What does that mean concretely? Jordan and I feel like the most comprehensive way to understand that is to understand power in the form of industrial complexes. So we've all heard of the military complex, the military-industrial complex. Can I just get a show of hands who's heard of that term? Great, I love that. It's a framework that we can actually extend past the military into sectors like finance and tech. And really you can kind of understand it as the cooperation and the working together of big corporate power and government power coming together in the name of profit at the expense of the working class. I'm going to demonstrate that concretely so we really get this, because it's so fundamental to our education in this project, through the AI bubble. I feel like this graphic went pretty viral, so people may have seen this before. I'm seeing nods. And what it demonstrates, right, is this sort of network of corporations that pass around the same money through different kinds of contracts that are used to build either data centers, microchips, etc. And yeah, they pass around the same money to each other, the same contracts to each other. It's like a network of these corporations. And they get a lot of their funding from venture capital, and more often and to bigger amounts from the US government and foreign investment. And these corporations are doing this in ways that deeply impact all of us. I'm sure people in this room have had family members, or even people in this room themselves, been impacted by the development of a data center. And often, more often than not, we're not given the opportunity to fight back against like these ideas that they have, these visions that they have, these projects and plans that they have. I feel like that's for maybe multiple reasons, but the two that I think Hands That Steel can help with is, one, the education. Not many people know about how these structures work. And then the second is, even if you know how it works, you might not know how to fight against it. And so we're trying to educate people through games, through these sort of lecture-style teach-ins, how to do those two things. Learn about these power structures and how to come together as a community on the local level to fight against the power structures. So those are industrial complexes, the sort of, again, relationship between big corporate power, big government power. For the rest of this afternoon, we're gonna go through a couple topics. The intro we've already done. The second thing is a specific neo-colonial tool and system facilitating exploitation through the financial industrial complex. We're gonna go into a little bit of the history of how America became the hegemony it is today, because it was explicitly designed through what I'm going to explain is the Bretton Woods system, and that's the economic world order that we are currently living under and actually transitioning out of as the world splits from American hegemony into a multipolar world where we see multiple big government and corporate powers. The third thing we're gonna talk about is a resistance study. It's a little thing we like to do specifically to look at past decolonial struggle, because there's a ton to learn from those time periods. Obviously, right now, we're not going through the same kind of brutal repression that a lot of these global south countries were. They were trying to get free from slavery. But it's still big corporate power, big government power. And a lot of the tactics that they used to get free, we can use today. And so educating folks on that is something that's important to us. That's what we're gonna do with the third point. The fourth and final point for today's topics will be what is to be done. Because, as I said at the top, the missions of the project: educate, organize, mobilize. We can't just stop the education part. We have to actually start talking about solutions, because I think at this point people are also maybe tired of the diagnoses of the problem. And so it's great to be in an era of actually starting to build and talk through and work through solutions. And we're gonna do a little bit of that and maybe see how y'all can potentially get involved with us too. Okay, we're gonna hop into our second game. As I said, it's gonna explain the Bretton Woods system, which is the economic order that we are all currently living under. It's named after the hotel it was created in. I believe it's in Vermont. New Hampshire, thank you. I always get those confused, New Hampshire and Vermont. Anything else for that part? All right, let's get into the second game.
Sorry. I drifted. Where was I? Ah, yes. The rat. And in that trap. Yet another wild story about capitalists promoting privatization and that free markets is a solution to all of life's problems. Only two hands to tell this one. Damn, Daddy. Quack, quack. Okay, Stubbs. You're gonna help me foreground the story of the death trap with this import-export minigame. Check out these buildings. They represent the major institutions and businesses that provide for the mouths of this land. The goal of the game is to import fuel and goods to the correct buildings so facilities can survive. Each of these buildings has two of the cutest little stat bars. The green bar represents the amount of money the building has, while the blue bar represents fuel. As time passes, the mouths will use both fuel and money, so both bars will decrease. It's your task to keep them stable. Delivering fuel and the correct imports to the correct buildings will keep the bars up. Like the hospital. Gonna need fuel and medication. Oh, mouths. Do you mind? Perfect. Here they come now. Go ahead and grab those, will ya? Once needed items are imported and grabbed, then take them to where they belong. Now for exports, which is actually how the mouths make their money. In this land, the imperial hands have determined the monocrop shall be crude oil, so we drill, baby, drill, and sell, baby, sell. Export oil by grabbing and shipping it in the now empty box. Then, take the cash earned. Unfortunately, exporting oil likely won't make us enough money to save for development and provide for mouths. So, when you need a little extra cash to keep things afloat, you can always get a loan. Just press the right button and we'll set you up with a loan from the hands. Or, I guess you could raise taxes. The tax rate is set by your hand. If you want to raise it to get more money, just press the green button. I suppose I should warn you though, the mouths won't like that. Okay, hands, are we ready to play? Guys, get back to the story. This has gone on long enough. Yes? Okay, ready, set. I forgot about that. How can I forget the main character's story? You accrue debt when you import goods and fuel. You also accrue debt with loans. Just don't forget to pay it back. Ready? Bring on the boxes. Here is 1944 at the tail end of World War II. D-Day, or the day the USS glorified all those history war movies, just happened. About 1 month after D-Day, at the Mount Washington Hotel in New Hampshire, 730 delegates from all 44 Allied nations decided to meet in person to create the new financial world order. While the rest of the West are still licking their Nazi-flavored wounds, the United States, as rich and bossy as they've ever been, used its growing power to make the US dollar the global reserve currency, crowning itself as the new empire in charge. In order to protect that power, the US then created global financial institutions to cement its economic reign: the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. As previously mentioned, crazy as it sounds, all Allied nations agreed to this plan. But who wasn't present at the meeting was Africa. At the time of the conference, The imperialist boot is heavy on the global South's neck, while the Allied powers are structurally changing the entire world economy in their favor. Not one African country had a voice. They were all still colonized. Now, as a result, we live in a world where the global north wields international financial institutions to their whim. And even the freest of African nations are still economically enslaved. We see this clearly demonstrated in the 1980s, when African countries like Nigeria and Sierra Leone were forced to implement economic rules created by the West in order to get loans from the IMF and the World Bank to develop their own industries. These rules are called SAPs. SAPs suck, and they're about as useful as farting in my mouth. Countries that implemented these rules ended up preventing their own development by devaluing local currency, gutting government salaries, cutting employment, and privatizing major industries. SAPs are antithetical to Africa's goal of rising out of economic poverty, and the West knows this. Why force Africa to follow them? So foreign private investment can flow freely into Africa without restriction, leaving African countries stuck in the financial quagmire of being beholden to the interests of Western capital. An underdeveloped Africa controlled by Western corporations and swimming in US dollar-denominated debt traps African countries with only one major way to make money: selling what the West wants to buy at the prices the West chooses to pay. And therein lies the trap.
Oh, thank you. Okay, some key points from that level. It's something we like to do after each game because there's a lot going on, a lot of information at once, and so there's specific things that are good to keep in mind. At the end of World War II, the Americans are by far the richest country in the entire world. A lot of Western countries that previously, during the British Empire, had wealth, lost it after fighting the Nazis. And so at the time, the US owns, like, I think 2/3 of the world's gold. Meaning that when they're starting to rebuild the both financial structure and also just the West more generally, the US has a lot of bargaining power in the tools and systems that are being rebuilt after World War II. Some of the architecture, the financial architecture they decided to make are the IMF and the World Bank, two institutions that still exist to today. I believe they're both stationed in DC. And these are two institutions that are still used today to get loans for economic development. When a global South country, or really any country, needs investment for economic development, it's not something that can be raised through taxes. That's something we try to demonstrate in the import-export minigame. It also can't be paid for through imports and exports as well. So typically, including the United States, if you're trying to develop anything economically, you're getting foreign investment for that. Or you're turning to institutions like the IMF and the World Bank to do that too. So the IMF is where you go for money for crisis. So we think COVID, think infectious disease. And the World Bank is where you go if you want to make like bridges, roads, infrastructure. But in order to get loans from either place, these global South countries, especially Africa, we're subject to things called structural adjustment programs, or SAPs. And these are essentially just rules that the West created to control how money gets into these countries and how it can be used. And instead of using it in ways that were actually positive for economic growth, it ends up being the exact opposite. It's inimical to these countries and that entire continent's growth on purpose. And the reason why, as we try to explain in the game, is to keep Africa poor. Because when you're poor and you have nothing to sell because you haven't developed any industries, all you have is your raw commodities. All you have is the dirt, the rocks, and the ground. And they can make those prices as cheap as they want, and they do that so that they can continue to exploit these resources and then create products at the prices that the West wants to sell. And so those two institutions help do that. When I'm answering the question, right, why is Africa so poor, that's part of the answer. It's a huge part of the answer, the financial architecture of the world and the Bretton Woods system. The other thing that, actually before I get into the third thing, I have two resources for you. The first is straight from the World Bank's mouth on structural adjustment programs in Nigeria, my home country. And I like to use it as a resource for people to check out so you can actually see how the World Bank talks about their own policies. Obviously, they're not going to talk about the negative effects. They're never going to be honest about their real intentions behind it, but it's always good to get the word from the exploiters, right? So you can learn how they talk about their projects. So I have that for you. And then I also have a more critical article of a study done on structural adjustment programs and infectious disease mortality in Africa as well. And this is a source where we can actually start to hear a lot of the critiques of SAPs. Okay. So the last thing that I'm going to talk about specifically for financial architecture is something called exorbitant privilege. And I think this is a good term to understand when we learn about America's power back then and also how it's losing its power today. And so it just refers to the USD, the dollar, being used as an international reserve currency all around the world, which is a huge privilege and one that the United States holds solely. What that means is just that the dollar is used all over the world in central banks for trade amongst different countries all over the world. Even if the United States is not involved in that trade, if it's using dollars, we get to benefit from it. We get a cut of that trade, and we actually get to control how that money is stored usually. It's usually Western banks. It's usually Western applications that are doing these transfers, and so it allows us to kind of have our hands, I shouldn't say ours, right? I'm not part of this people controlling, but it allows the United States to have their hands in a lot of different money pots. It also keeps the dollar valuable and profitable for the United States government. And so we've had this privilege since the end of World War II. One other thing. Central banks are, if people don't know, it's like the bank's bank. That's where the bank gets money. And because we have a fiat currency, which means it's not tied to anything physical, they can just print dollars whenever, giving them such a huge power and privilege. I'm not going to go too deep into a lot of the privileges that we have gotten from being an international reserve currency, but I just want to name that privilege is ending because other countries in the global south, and not just the global south, have seen the ways the United States has exploited that privilege to their own gains. As an example, just this week, Scott Bessent, who is the head of the Federal Reserve, which is our central bank, announced that they froze a bunch of funds from Iran because they just can't do that, because the financial infrastructure is set up that because they're using dollars and they're using these Western banks, they can freeze assets whenever they want. They've done it to countries that aren't just Iran, but I thought that was an example this week. He was on the news just talking about that. Okay. Our third and final game is our resistance study about a group of African revolutionaries called the Mau Mau, but also known as the Kenyan Land and Freedom Army. And like I said, we like to use this as a precedent because there's a lot that we can learn from them. I can't go into all the details of the history, but these are two great resources for you if you are interested, and I hope that you are, because it's a great story. Kenya, when they were fighting for the liberation, was kind of the first domino for a lot of African countries to also revolt for independence at the end of the British Empire. At the end of empire is a great time for revolution, y'all. Just putting that out there. Okay, let's get into the third game.
I heard folks are searching for a little hope and direction on how to resist these days. I'll be honest, couldn't be me. I'd much rather just, vote about it. But, to each their own. Not judging. Definitely not judging. Anyways, if you're looking for some inspiration, I've got his story about a group of African revolutionary baddies called the Mau Mau. in Kenya during the 1950s. Remember, World War II and the Bretton Woods Conference were just a few years ago in the 40s. Great Britain, much like Shamerica, was in its flop era, desperately trying to hold on to its empire and colonies. But the indigenous population in Kenya had enough of Britain's repression and land stealing. For decades, Kenyans were being subjected to land alienation laws that took homes from native tribes to give to the colonizing hands. The Land Acquisition Act of 1894, the Crown Lands Ordinance of 1902, then 1915, and the Kenyan Native Area Ordinance of 1926 were all used to push indigenous Kenyans from the most fertile highlands, making way for settlers who were there for resource extraction and market expansion. Now, of course, Kenyans did not take this lying down. On the contrary, my sweet supple baby boy, they resisted like hell, and non-violently, at first. The ideological backbone of this resistance effort were trade unions fighting for labor rights. Under trade union leadership, Kenyans organized a series of strikes, with the largest general strike occurring in 1950 that involved over 100,000 workers. These strikes brought together not only laborers, but also peasants, the urban poor, and Kenyan soldiers that returned from fighting in World War II just to face racial discrimination. Such a large coalition of people made consensus challenging, but all factions importantly agreed on fighting for the end of racial discrimination, land alienation, and taxation. Unfortunately, years of negotiation, strikes, and non-violent advocacy were proving ineffective. So the more militant coalition of the Kenyan Land and Freedom Army began galvanizing the masses to take up arms against British rule. 1952. The Mau Mau retreat to the Aberdare Forest to regroup their resistance efforts in a place free from colonial surveillance. The British, who had gotten word about the more militant strategy from the Mau Mau, declare a state of emergency in an effort to crush the rebellion as it was reaching a more critical phase. And was really ramping up. Kenyan Land and Freedom Army fighters began attacking key colonial infrastructure and individuals who collaborated with the Crown. These raids would provide them with more arms and supplies for the next attack. At this point, the Mau Mau had majority public support from the indigenous population, many of whom were providing supplies, food, and intel about the colonizers, which put the British on the defense. The colonizers' main tools to squash the resistance were propaganda and violence. They painted the Kenyan Land and Freedom Army as savage terrorists with diseases and no real agenda. They mobilized over 55,000 troops, created concentration camps to capture and torture Mau Mau supporters and innocent civilians, assassinated many of the Mau Mau trade union leadership, while settlers committed extrajudicial killings targeting people and villages the colonizers suspected of being part of the Mau Mau. By 1956, the Kenyan Land and Freedom Army had lost the majority of its coalition and the public support that helped sustain its resistance efforts. The violence from the British colonizers had effectively squashed the rebellion.
All right, key points from our Meow Meow prototype. I won't go through all of these things, but some important things to remember. The repression from the British government was really brutal. They used concentration camps to enact a lot of their violence. When you see photos from the past about slavery in Africa, I feel like I remember both the Belgian folks, Belgian colonizers and the British colonizers as being the most brutal. When we see those pictures, it's usually from those specific countries and their violence towards both Kenya and I think Belgium was the Congo. But one tactic that I think is worth discussing that they used in that violence were these things called home guards. Because the British could have just used their own forces, right, to come invade Africa and have them be the ones enacting this violence. But it was actually way more effective to use home guards, which were just other Kenyans to do that work. It's a very effective strategy of divide and conquer that we still see today. I think a good example of that is ICE, right? We could have foreign agents that are doing that work, but they actually just use our community. The reason that they do that is because then you don't know who to trust, right? It sows a lot of discord amongst local folks. And it is an effective tactic. A divide and conquer tactic has been effective in the past, and it still is today. Trade unions were the central organizing force against that violence in the resistance towards British colonization. Not because trade unions are specifically good at fighting against slavery, but because they were the main organizing force doing any kind of like resistance work at the time, specifically on behalf of labor. And so the movement for independence only got stronger when it became tied to the movement for labor. And I feel like that's something we definitely need to keep in mind, right? The more struggles that we can tie together, the stronger the coalition of folks, the stronger the movement, and the more the support. Last two things. The resistance was fought on two fronts, obviously physically with guerrilla war tactics, but also informationally with a newspaper that the Meow Meow created called the Kamathi Charter. And that was specifically important because as we see today, a lot of the colonizers use tools like media, in the case back then it was newspapers, to slander the resistance, which is important for them because they want to paint freedom fighters as lazy, as if they don't have any real intentions, as outside agitators. Like these are all things that they use to take away public support, which is extremely important for a resistance movement. We see that in Palestine, obviously, but not just in those places, in those areas. When public support isn't there for freedom fighting can't happen. And so when we're thinking about our own resistance movement here and during this time, as artists, as game designers, I think it's important to make propaganda for folks that are doing the work of resistance. Okay, we're transitioning to the very last part of the presentation. I'm about to pass it over to Jordan. This is where we talk about solutions, our favorite part. So there are many solutions and many things that we are going to need to try, right, as capitalism takes its last breaths, and we try to build and transition towards a more equitable, worker-centric, democratically organized, and local organized world. One of the solutions that we like to specifically talk about in this work, and I think a solution that we have really clung to between Jordan and I, comes out of Mississippi, called the Cooperation Jackson Cooperative, and they have been sort of pushing this vision forward for a radical transformation of society called the Build and Fight formula. I'm not going to read all the text on the screen, but essentially what their theory is and the thing they're trying to push is, in order for us to move away from these central power structures that we continue to talk about in this project, we have to start to build outside of those power structures to create infrastructure that allows us to basically maneuver around these corporations. And so there are, the principal architect of the theory is Kali Akuno. He's on the left. Actually, I don't know what it is on here, but the he is part of the Jackson, Mississippi collective. He's in conversation with David Cobb. And yeah, these are two really seasoned organizers who have been doing the work for many decades, and they have like a great conversation about the build and fight formula that I suggest that y'all check out at the QR code. But some of the pillars that Kale Akuno and Cooperation Jackson talks about that we will need to start to build, the reason why we like it as a solution is because it just seems very concrete and also very doable, and also it's work that we know is already being done. And so it's really great to actually hear from somebody who's been doing the work for decades, like what are the actual pillars of things that we need to start to build in order to maneuver around these big power structures that control us, coerce us, and seek to eliminate us, ultimately. Some of the things on the screen, again, I won't go over everything. I can use the open source technology as an example. Big tech uses our data against us, both just to surveil, but also to coerce and advertise to. If we are moving away from those technologies that are controlled by centralized power in these industrial complexes for open source technology, that is a way that we are maneuvering around them. We are creating our own tools, we are owning our own tools, and that is a way that we can start to build and both fight for a world beyond capitalism. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Jordan, who's going to talk very briefly about the mobilize and organize portions of this work. As I said today, what you experienced was sort of the education part, which is important to unpack and understand the problems. Then we start to mobilize and organize for the solutions, and Jordan's going to talk a little bit about that.
All right, hi y'all. Wow, my first games for change thing, nice. My name's Jordan, co-writer and co-designer for Hands That Steal. And what you've seen so far through this performance really encapsulates the foundational educate aspect of the project. But like we said before, this type of work for us needs to educate and immediately lead to action as the best way to kind of combat the oppressive forces in our lives. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the mobilize and organize aspects of the program, because that's something that we do not only through the live video game performance, but through the digital and physical group play that is something that we're going to be calling playdates. So, like today, these playdates will start with a video game performance. Thank you. That focuses on one of the power structures that we talked about, whether it's the military-industrial complex, financial-industrial complex, etc. And this leads to a group play where the audience becomes the players, whether it's going to be in LARPs or group play or board games that like break down the military-industrial complex, or social games that teach you about the technological-industrial complex. These will integrate the build and fight formula into the designs of the gameplay to show the players a problem with the teach-in, introduce them to the people that are doing the work to fight those problems, and also give them a space to learn how they want to do that work themselves. So that would be the digital performance followed by a non-digital and then a physical performance. And, excuse me. In order to do that, we're going to be looking for help. We're going to be looking. So, in order to do the playdates, when you show up to a playdate, you're going to come to play with local community organizers and people that are doing the work. Start with that performance and teach-in structure that we've shown you today, and then follow up with two types of group play, a digital and a non-digital group performance for us all. That sounds like, right? How are we going to do that? How are we going to accomplish that? What do we need in order to do that? So, Hands That Steal is an international multi-city project. We are in New York City, we're in Austin, we're in Montreal. We have done shows in all of those places, and we are looking to do things in local art spaces, community spaces, galleries, and now Games Festival. And speaking of local community spaces, I know there's like New York locals in here. Has anyone heard of the venue Brooklyn Artery? It's okay if you say no. Oh, you got some nods in there? Okay. So 2 weeks ago, we performed this at Brooklyn Artery to a nice full-packed crowd, and we've been in contact with them to do further playdates in that space, and that's sort of the type of ongoing relationship that we're looking to find with other people and organizations and venues here. We're a traveling program as well, so we're also looking to go to other cities and do this in the sort of format that you've seen today. Also, we are looking for more grassroots organizations to collaborate with. We already have like an ongoing list of people that we're working with, including local mutual aid organizations here in New York, but we're always open and welcome to more communities and organizations that are doing the work that want to be doing playdates with us as well. And finally, we said a lot of things today. I don't know if you realized or if it came to your mind, but this isn't the type of project that corporate sponsors are gonna like line up to fund. So we're looking for creative ideas to get funding as well. Things that are alternate methods that can get us to continue to design and build this project for a time to come. So if you're a person that saw any of those bullet points and think you can help us or you'd like to collaborate with us, please reach out to us. But before we get to the contact information and how we want people to find us, I just want to like take a moment to take this all in and really, from the bottom of our hearts, say thank you.
Okay, we're gonna leave with a little message from us to you. Jordan and I firmly believe in the radical transformation of society and how we can all work together to make that happen. We just gotta get a little creative and dedicated on how we achieve that. This transformation isn't gonna come and be given to us in the ballot box or handed to us by any one person in political office. It has to be built, fought for, and won. So the choice is yours, right? Do we continue to slide into techno-feudal fascism where we make ourselves available to be surveilled and controlled? Or do we say enough is enough and dedicate ourselves to build a world beyond capitalism? I know that we can win together. I think Jordan does too. If you're interested in joining our mission to do that, please talk to us afterwards. A huge, huge, huge thank you to Games for Change for having us today. This is the first time they've done a live format, and we really appreciate them being flexible, especially with the time. Aaron, Matt, who saved our asses today. Max in the back with the sound, and Molly for believing in the project enough to give us this time slot. Thank you all so, so, so much. This is Head in the Hands That Steal from Other Mouths.